South Africa spends billions on its intelligence services, but more and more questions are being raised about the quality of intelligence being gathered. We speak to Dianne Kohler-Barnard of the Democratic Alliance. She sits on the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence. Welcome, Dianne. Hello to you. Dan, I know you've signed the Official Secrets Act many times, and there are many things you can't talk about. But please tell us, if there were a revolution tomorrow, would the intelligence services know, or would they have to go on X and follow it?
Well, I think if we can go by what happened in relation not only to the July riots 2 years ago, but also the burning of the trucks in KwaZulu Natal, Mpumalanga, I think there were at least three provinces involved. And that happened in July, and they hadn't a clue. So I have very little belief. I just can't understand how it's happened, but I do not believe that there's any working together of the three intelligence agencies in terms of determining something like that. And the State Security Agency is supposed to keep us safe. Crime intelligence under the SAPS is supposed to fight off and arrest the big wigs in crime. And then there's the SANDF intelligence. They look externally. So we have the personnel, we have huge amounts of money going in. But how did we have the riots without anyone knowing, being caught with their pants around their ankles? How do we have the burning of the trucks, endless burning, destruction? And where are the arrests? I've certainly not heard of the big kingpins that Becky clearly was bragging about in terms of the July riots. No arrests made. In terms of the trucks burned, the only arrest I know that was made was a gentleman who was actually on camera in the one truck. And I believe private security company caught him. So I fear our SAPS crime intelligence and our state security agency are, and I'm not saying they're not great people inside and very experienced people, but somehow things have not been working. You must please understand that what was the Ministry of State Security of Intelligence has now been moved under the presidency, but that ministry, it has a revolving door. The ministers rarely last more than 1 year, and off they go. They're either, one is now working overseas. That was straight after the July riots. Others have been removed unceremoniously, especially ones who've really started to make a difference. The last one lasted a year. The new one, I haven't even seen her in this position yet. So I don't know that any of them have really come to grips with it. But the outcomes of the various commissions and panels, I think, explain everything about what's gone wrong and what continues to go wrong within these various agencies.
What is the role of the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence exactly?
Yeah, we do oversight. And bear in mind, we meet in secret. One's not allowed to have any kind of electronic device. You take handwritten notes. They stay there. They stay in files within the building. So there's never, to my knowledge, been a leak of information out of the committee. Plenty in the papers from disgruntled members of various divisions. But the committee is very cautious about the security of the country. And I think, you tell one person something, it'll be spread in no time at all, and that could endanger lives somewhere. So it's an oversight role in terms of crime intelligence that falls under the police service, the defense intelligence under the SANDF, and of course the State Security Agency. And that's where state security agencies, where the major issues were. We don't yet know if they're still going on. There's always a feeling that things are going on behind one's back. But, the revelations of the Fraser PAN system, private principal agent network, which basically was set up to stop any investigation into Jacob Zuma, I've laid criminal charges. They just disappear. Nothing happens. He's never been picked up. In fact, he was just moved on to being the DG of correctional services, and now that has not been renewed. But there's no sign of anything ever happening to him, whether he knows too much about too many people or whether he's just a Teflon person, I don't know. But it was, as was revealed in the Zondo Commission, hundreds of millions went missing, strolling out of the doors in suitcases. Huge amounts of money just simply disappeared, usually before big conferences or congresses. And not one cent of that has been recovered at any stage. So this committee, I think it used to be totally dysfunctional. They barely met, etc. Now, since this term and when I joined, we meet at least twice a week for 5 to 6 hours a time. So we feel we're on top of things, but getting things done is always quite tricky. We've appointed the Inspector General of Intelligence. That was all done in public, and all the interviews done in public. And I thought that was a very successful move. But it is extremely difficult to do the work, and then at times you feel that it's being deliberately undermined, in that many of the members, although the 3 DA members are very good at always attending, unfortunately, and the only other party who participates, the ANC, unfortunately, they're so often senior members who have other responsibilities, so they can't attend. And that's a crying shame, because it ends up where you have a big contingent of members from one or other of the divisions arriving, and all the questioning and grilling, etc., is left to very few people.
So it's not being as effective as it should be. And
no, and such, there's always the question: is that deliberate? Is it deliberate? Is it to keep people from doing a credible oversight? And one being in the committee, you don't want to believe that's a possibility, but it's quite disheartening when you realize that things are happening that you actually are deliberately kept in the dark about.
Let's go to crime intelligence, the police's crime intelligence. We've seen that at a conservative estimate, 155 billion a year is being leached from the South African economy by these crime bosses. Yet I can't recall when last an organized crime syndicate leader was arrested. Can you?
No. I thought crime intelligence was doing really well under General Peter Jacobs. I started to see that all the looting channels were being shut down. Things were coming under control, and the arrests were beginning. And he was very strangely removed just before the July riots. And all sorts of charges were laid. Not one of them ever held any water. And he's now been dumped somewhere else altogether, in the Secretariat or some division. But since then, it's been catastrophic. There's been nothing. There's been a complete lack of vision. I believe there's political interference, bad management, bad coordination. Crime intelligence has just collapsed, which is why you've got an increase now in cash and transit heists and the like. They were almost on top of those, and those were going down. Things were happening. And if you look at the latest crime stats, I think it speaks for itself. Through the roof. In any other acceptable country, I think the Minister of Police would have fallen on his sword years ago. I think the time for excuses is well over, and the fact that people just don't feel safe in their homes anymore. And if they have the money to pay for private security, those are the people they'll phone. They won't even bother to phone the local police station, who very seldom answers the phone. I've done tests of many police stations, and the vast majority don't answer their phone. The details on the internet are wrong. you might as well not have a police service in many areas. I mean, when did you last see a police vehicle patrolling in your area? I've asked many people that, and they just go, I can't remember. So billions of rands going into entities that just seem not to be effective. And certainly crime intelligence is absolutely one of them. Look, I think defense intelligence, they're a different kettle of fish. They're on the ball, on top of things. They're very impressive in presentations, etc. But of course, their budget's been cut to such an extent that I'm watching these people, the burdens on them, one feels they're going to just collapse in the end. It is absolutely horrific, as they're refused to be allowed to fill any of the positions that come vacant. They just pile that workload on more and more and more on individuals, and it's not doing this country any good at all. The fact that we had that tragedy with the submarine, there are so many issues that have come to light that could have been prevented with decent financial backing, and they really try very hard. I think the two biggest problems are crime intelligence and the State Security Agency.
Now, we know there's a complex relationship between organized crime, syndicates, intelligence assets, and corruption. Many crime bosses are allowed to operate with impunity because they provide intelligence to state security organizations.
Well, ask anyone who sits on a CPF, the Community Policing Forum, and they'll say, well, the locals came to me, they said, we're quite sure they're selling drugs from X house, X area. And so we asked the local police to raid that house. And oddly enough, the moment they got there, the place was empty. I can give you chapter and verse of dozens and dozens of cases like that. And so you know that the police have tipped off the people in charge of that particular production house or outlet. And we hear more and more often of massive, shall we call them, laboratories producing the cocaines, etc., in high quality, very expensive, gated estates in Mpumalanga, up the coast, down the coast, in the Midlands, in gated estates. And then no one pays any attention to any other neighbor behind their tall walls. No one realizes what's going on there until finally it's found, and they pick up a handful of them. And you must realize if they've caught one in a year, it means there are another 50 producing, to the extent we're net exporters of some of these deadly drugs. So I think the rot, it runs so deep now. Bear in mind that the requirements from getting into the police have been downgraded to such a level. There's no psychometric testing anymore. You could take in someone with a major problem who may well end up turning their gun on someone else. But none of that is checked anymore. So it was a fight with unions, as it is a fight with that. They've stopped even the weekly exercise regime, which was standard practice in the SAPs. So all of that has white-anted the discipline levels and the levels of integrity within the SAPs. And when people speak now, they speak automatically of, oh, well, they just said they would give me a 10,000 Rand fine, or they would chuck me in a jail cell if I didn't pay them 500 Rand. And people pay and they drive off. It's almost endemic, and absolutely nothing is being done about it. Nothing, zero, zilch.
Now, we've also got the General Intelligence Laws Amendment Bill coming up.
Yes.
With some very controversial provisions. May we talk about that?
Yes. Look, this bill And I have to tell you, we have been attempting to deal with this bill for as long as I've been on the committee this term. We got so frustrated as a committee, we announced we were going to do a committee bill, because your biggest problem was created in the Fraser era, when the international and the domestic entities were simply shoved together, and they only had one aim, and that was protect Jacob Zuma. That was it. And that's all been revealed in the high-level review panel report. And so the law has to be changed to divide them up so that they're acting legally. And eventually, our suggestions were all chucked out. And through cabinet came this proposal, which is quite extraordinary. I mean, it goes so far as to allow or insist on vetting of civilians. NGOs seem to be in the firing line. It ignores the Amabungane judgment about the mass interceptions. So there are huge issues in this. But do remember that when bills are put together, what is eventually passed is usually nothing like that. Hopefully. But I mean, the initial GLAB, General Intelligence legislation, was passed in 2012. So then the review panel recommendations were fix it up, change it, and this now again splits the State Security Agency into two: intelligence, domestic and international, again foreign. The general idea is it'll be harder to centralize power or abuse their resources if there are two DGs heading two separate intelligence agencies. But what's wrong with it? Certainly, it expands their vetting powers in an extraordinary fashion, even to the extent they want to vet individuals who operate non-profit organizations, religious organizations, and even private security companies. They want to vet them. I mean, to give those kind of powers over civilians really church entities.
So if our own intelligence agencies cannot be counted on to provide credible intelligence to the country, what are we doing with intelligence provided by foreign intelligence agencies that could be credible in some instances?
Yeah, I think that is a huge question to be asked. Certainly, I feel there is an issue with foreign intelligence not being sufficiently utilized or at least looked into in some way. And I see foreign intelligence agencies then suddenly go to the media. And suddenly in the media, you'll have, there are, as we saw, let's say, a year ago, there are people in South Africa funding ISIS in Mozambique. Now that was the claim that was made by Americans, and yet we've seen no action in this regard. Whether we don't have the ability to track those funds, or whether it's being done and simply not told, but certainly I don't see any possibility of arrests or anything else, and it's not through lack of asking. So again, pretty much kept in the dark in this regard, but one does sense the frustration by credible agencies who give information. And you can't tell me that's not happening in terms of crime intelligence, international, and syndicates. There are global syndicates that work. And bear in mind, these syndicates, which involve drug trafficking, human trafficking, the prostitution, etc. I mean, it's an entire entity that works globally. They do not recognize borders. They have the biggest boats, the biggest cars, the best planes. They fly under the radar, drop off, pick up. And it's an entire entity that is run around the world, which the average person does not understand exists. And if you're wondering how the drugs get onto the streets, how the children are disappearing, I've seen personally trucks with special little cubby holes built in behind the driver, and then they put in tons of goods. And meanwhile, in that cubicle behind the driver are 5 or 6 children tied up, drugged, and taken out the country and sold. So these things are going on all the time, and one just doesn't see the success rate at all. There are no scanners on our borders, which of course should be a standard procedure. And so the only way for someone to look into what's really in a truck is to offload the entire thing, which can take half a day. So it's not going to happen. So it's a rubber stamp exercise, and the children are disappearing. People are smuggled in, goods are smuggled out, and where is our intelligence on this? Absolutely nowhere. So it's incredibly frustrating, and you just have to keep on asking, where are the hundreds of millions going to in terms of these various entities that don't seem to deliver when it comes to protecting South Africans from the worst of the worst? It's just not happening. Our status in terms of crime is now, I mean, it's disgusting. We're rising up towards one of the worst crime-ridden countries in the world, and that is an absolute and utter disgrace. Only place I've actually seen crime levels coming down to any appreciable extent is in areas of around Cape Town, where they have literally trained their own people on the ground who are now, because of visible policing, which we proved as a country is extremely effective during the FIFA World Cup. If you remember, there were police on every street corner. There wasn't any crime at all during that period. And that's what they're doing there, and it seems to be bringing the murder rate down dramatically. Why aren't we doing it elsewhere in the country? I have no idea. And I'm sick to death of politicians playing politics instead of just doing the damn job.
Thank you. That was Dianne Kohler-Barnard of the Democratic Alliance speaking to BizNews about the sorry state of South Africa's intelligence services. Thank you, Dianne.
My pleasure.